right, we're going to talk about Ionic and mobile apps and all the really fun things that happen when you try to make an app performant and run on every single device, and like a Samsung Galaxy Note 7, and it doesn't blow up. Everything that goes in fun with that. If you want to follow me and get a link to the slides in the demo later, it actually helps my ego. Follow me on Twitter. If not, I'll just cry about it. So, I'm going to skip the show of hands because that light is crazy. But let's kind of dive into what Ionic is for those who aren't really sure what it is. So, at a really high level, Ionic is a complete entire framework, SDK, whatever you want to call it, for developing hybrid apps. That is, you have a web view, you have HTML, CSS, JavaScript, it gets loaded up, has direct access to device APIs through a JavaScript bridge. And the main selling point is that's it. There is just no native UI. It's all web, easy to port around, throw on iOS, Android, and then throw it up on the web, and you're done. Ionic takes it a little bit further by providing you with all of these pre-built components that you would need and normally get from the native SDKs. So things like tab bars, form controls, animation, gesture supports, all the fun things that native developers just get kind of out of the box, Ionic provides. And we utilize two technologies that really make this process a lot easier. We use Angular for its coding structure, its reusable components. It's a pretty popular framework. I will attempt a show of hands. Who has used Angular before? Exactly. And we actually use CSS preprocessor Sass to make sure that if you want an app to look like your brand, you don't have to go through a whole lot of work to make that happen. And the main goal of Ionic is to empower web developers everywhere. We don't want web developers to just kind of sit on the sidelines like, oh, those mobile app guys, they're so cool. They get to make mobile apps, sell it on the store. They get to make millions just by writing Objective-C in Java. No, web developers can actually take part in this and build the apps that they want to build and ship it to the stores. And all they have to know is a stack that they already have, web technologies. So this kind of area seems to be getting quite popular again. This whole write once, deploy everywhere, learn once, deploy everywhere. We're seeing it with many other technology stacks. Not going to name them because you know who they are. And a lot of pain points people tend to say is, it's this web thing, it's kind of old, we've heard it before. We've had these new JavaScript to native kind of runtimes where you write it in JavaScript, but you're still displaying native UI. Or some people just throw it off to the side and say, you know what, I have people who are competent iOS developers and Java developers, and I have a dedicated web team. Not saying anything bad about all those solutions. You know, you got to pick whatever solution works best for you. If you are maybe a C# consultancy, yeah, I'm not going to make you want to learn web technology. There are already other technologies that work great for you. So always pick whatever is going to work best for your team. But myself, I don't know Objective-C. I saw the @NS string, all those weird things, and I don't want to learn Java. I know JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I know that technology really well. That's what I'm going to use. And anyone who kind of thinks, well, the web just can't cut it. It can't get the performance that we want, or it can't do a feature, do something that we want. Well, for features, we have the plugin architecture to kind of polyfill all of that. For performance, the web's looking pretty good these days. We're seeing a lot of improvement from the folks at Chrome and Safari inside their mobile browsers to get things a lot faster. And these are shipping pretty regularly. I think iOS 10 came out not too long ago. It's already at like 70% market share, which is amazing. And we've been working hard at this at Ionic. We've been working on Ionic 2 to take advantage of all of these new things that are kind of happening in the web development circle. Things like Angular 2, things like TypeScript, better devices, Android 5, 6, and now 7, all the fun stuff that we get to deal with. So I don't really have slides. I have practical demos that I want to go through and kind of show off an app that I actually built. But these are the key points I want to kind of illustrate. We want to keep learning Ionic 2 simple. You don't have to think really too hard about how does this app work or what's going to do what. We want to make sure that navigation is top-notch. So that way, if you have a native app, you can have that same kind of navigation paradigm. And it'll all become clearer like as I show you this. We want to make sure that the tooling is top-notch as well. So that way, you don't have to go through the JavaScript fatigue that many people feel with the large amount of tools that we have out there. And also kind of a hidden goal. We want to make learning Angular 2 easy. Because Angular 2 has a lot of new concepts in it, and we really don't think that developers should have to deal with all that, at least on their own. So we'll look at the simplicity part first. And before I jump into that, I just want to show you guys the app that I actually wrote. So this is a Spotify search app. I actually got the idea from the PhoneGap team. Coincidentally, they wrote a post showing off this same setup, and I thought it was a great example of a very complete, beyond to-do apps. So I was very impressed with it and used it as a source of inspiration for my app. So we have iOS over here, Android right in the middle, and for the folks that have a Windows device, we have Windows on the side. But we have iOS and Android, the ones that we're going to really focus on. We have a search bar where I'm just going to copy this. I have some kind of form validation. I could actually clear that input out. I'm going to put it back in. I can search through my form controls, get nice animations as I change it. I'm going to search. You notice we get that nice animations that feel at home to the platform. This is a buddy of mine's back home's band, so I thought when he sees this video later on online, he will be very touched that I used his music. So we can use audio. We get a nice progress bar that shows the progress on the app, on the music. Play and pause, toggle that. As we go back in history, music stops because it's kind of what users expect. And all of those have their own, don't need to play the audio for this, but the menu button, the play pause button has the nice animations on Android. Windows Phone has the same thing. Timing. We'll go back to the beginning, and that's the entirety of the app. Plays music, runs on iOS, Android, Windows Phone. Actually, let's load it up. Okay, make sure that comes across. So here's an older version of my phone. I'll search for something different. I'm a huge classical music fan too, so cool. We have all this playing. This is playing as well. Mute that. But what you notice, that play pause button up in the top, we can toggle that. So we're hooking into some of the native UI. So if we scroll down, We have the album art, we have the song name, all kind of standard features that you would expect from an app. So, let's kind of look at the code for that. Won't punish you too much with the BIM today, but make sure that that is perfectly sized. We're going to look at some of this from kind of a bridge perspective, because I can't go over everything in 45 minutes, but I can go over the main points that I want you to see. So let's, for starters, take this search page into consideration. So I know that is in Pages, Search, and let's look at the code for that first. So this may look a little bit intimidating, but once you break it down to kind of understand what's going on here, it's quite straightforward. So we're using Angular 2. We're importing a few things. We need to import our navigation. We need to import our component decorator. We need to import forms, and the second page we want to navigate to. This is kind of run-of-the-mill Angular 2 stuff. We have our at component, which is basically just going to tell Angular that this class that we're going to write down below, it's going to be displayed as a component. So this is your, coming from Angular 1, this is your directive, this is your reusable element. And down here, we have the setup for some of our forms. We have a term that we want to be able to control later on, so we have it extracted out. But basically, we're just creating a form control, so that first text input. We have the predetermined text for my band, my buddy's band, and we say that it needs to be filled out. Pretty straightforward. We declare the form down here, and I just extracted this term. Again, I needed it for something else. So once I've already declared it here, I can just reuse it down here. And that's really the end of the form. And then from that, we just have a search where we push a second page and push the form's value along to that second page. And then we have a reset control. Other than that, that's really all it is on the code front. So let's actually look at the file for it. So we have our Ion header. So if you've done any Ionic 1 before, if you've used any mobile app, they probably have a general header bar where it's going to display titles, maybe some buttons if you want a menu. For example, this one has a menu button that we can toggle a side menu that doesn't really do anything. Here we go. Oops. We'll go back to this. So in here we have the header, we have the Ion nav bar, which is just going to queue up all the animations. We have a button. It's in here. It's got the attribute of menu toggle, so menu toggle, it's going to be a menu. We can assume that that's going to open and close the menu for us. For there, we have an Ion title, which is this is just going to set the title for the page. Well, it's pretty straightforward and easy to kind of understand at a glance. From here, we have our Ion content, which is our main scrollable area. Everything that you do inside of an app, inside of a page, all gets rendered into here. We have our standard form element, so nothing that Ionic is providing itself. And then we have this Ion item with an input, a button, and a label for it. Kind of Ionic pre-built components. But what you see is that we have, our placeholder label off to the side. Let's actually just pull this one out. We have the input label off to the side, kind of already taken care of for us. We have our text input where we can select. We can even tab through all of this. So screen readers for the win. We'll copy that, delete it. You notice that we get the button disabled, and we have the button to search and go to the next page, and then the button to clear the input is also gone. So if we put that back, we can actually clear everything and get that nice response that we're used to. So that's all kind of held in here. At first, it may look a little intimidating, but you got to realize is that this is all just valid HTML. We have browser hidden. We have the hidden property that's on this item. Make sure that we don't show it when we don't need to, and we have our ability to do some event binding with Angular 2's curly brace syntax, which I really, really like. And that's it for the search input. The form controls to be able to toggle what you want to search for is just a collection of radio toggles. So taking inspiration from the material design, iOS, and all of the other platforms out there, we have Ion Radio. It just adapts to the platform, so that way we don't have to hard code like what it looks like. So that's one for if we want to search for a song track name. If we want to search for a particular artist, we can do that. Maybe an album, or if we just want to do a general search for everything inside the store or inside of Spotify, we can just set the value to everything, which it defaults to. And then we have a button down here. Again, it's just using the native browser's form API, and anytime you hit submit, it'll take care of it and send it off, so we don't have to do any click event handling over here. It's all held up in this form submission. That's really all it is for the search page. We can look at the results page, where it's a little bit more complicated, but still not overly difficult to kind of grasp. We have an ngIf over here. Maybe there's an error trying to make a connect, trying to make a request. So if I were to come over to my phone, go into airplane mode, go back to visor, all coordinating really well. Find tracks. Let's close the app first. Oh no, you're offline. So we can handle offline situations a little bit better and provide meaningful results to the user. So that's all this little div is doing. Loading up an icon, displaying a warning saying that something's gone wrong. Nothing crazy over there. From here, we have a single item. Then we're going to use Angular 2's ng4 to kind of iterate over every single result that we have coming back from our request. From there, it's typical Angular 2 event bindings, so we can start using those double curlies for our interpolation. We can start using their new property binding to say that this value of source is dynamic, and it's going to be set to the value of track, which is also declared up here. So we get a nice kind of composability that is familiar to Angular 1. You have our pipes, our filters, or whatever they want to call them nowadays. From here, we go to our track detail page. And this is probably the most complicated page that I have in the app. We have a single card, which is just going to show the track image as like a full banner kind of page. So we get that nice kind of graphic display that most music player apps have. We get our track name, the artist name, the album name, and then down here, yes, I'm using the HTML audio element, which is weird. Very different from everything else. We have a column where we're just setting the width, so that way we can just get this nice separation, all provided out of the box from Ionic. And then we're just dynamically changing the icons. I'm sure there's probably a more elegant way to do that, but it's not really the point. So after our row is closed out with our two columns, we have our last bit, which is this little area down here in the bottom. We're just going to set the track duration and parse that number as minutes and seconds instead of just milliseconds, because that's what Spotify returns. So while all that may kind of seem like a giant whirlwind tour of everything. Once you take a second to kind of like look through the code, and all the code's going to be available afterwards, it's kind of easier to understand where all this code is going towards. Like, you can look at the code and kind of reason about it and get a better idea of what this will render out to without ever having to run a server or deploy it to a device. You can kind of reason about it. It's much more semantic and much clearer about its intent, something that's, I think, is pretty awesome. So, the navigation part, I'm also kind of touched on it a little bit. But if we look at this search page, we have this reference to the app's kind of global navigation system. So if anyone's ever done anything with iOS navigation before, there's this concept of a navigation controller, where it's the entire app that just handles things out as a tree of view controllers. We kind of borrowed that concept and applied it to the web. So right now, there are no URLs in here by default, because that's how we designed it. URLs actually come as an afterthought, where we can navigate however we want in our app by loading whatever components we want, whatever data we want to pass in, and then we tell the URL, okay, I am here, URL should be this with this params. It's a little bit different to how Angular does it right now with their router. We think it's a little bit better approach for mobile. But now, as I navigate around, I can actually navigate to one page, but then also have full control of where does the user go back to. I can pre-populate my back views with maybe 4 or 5 other different components. So if you think of an example like a deep link, you get a push notification that someone liked your Instagram post about your dog, and you get brought down right to the comment. Well, then how do you actually follow the trail back up? And our navigation controller kind of acts the same way. So you can link to the inner post and then follow the breadcrumb from that URL segment on how it should go back up, all kind of just automatically. Something I think is really impressive, and I'm really proud of the lead for making this happen. We can actually look at the results page, and again, when we pass that data from one page, how do we get it on the following page? Well, we have this nav param service where we can just call that data that we passed in and say, just get me that data that you sent me from before. It's already available on the actual class instance, so we can just pull it in and load it however we want. And for example, this one, I'm passing in the search, so that form value, passing it into my Spotify service, calling load. And if we actually want, we'll look at that Spotify service. And again, this could probably be done a little bit more elegantly. Not really the point. But we're just making a request, passing that full object along, and just sending it along to Spotify's API, all right out of the box kind of provided. So the navigation is much more flexible and allows you to create that full experience that you would want. You're not really limited by the URL. You can kind of just design the flow of the app. So another perfect example, say you wanted to push up a modal and then have its own nested navigation within it, but not really affect the URL. How would you do that inside of Angular 2, or how would you do that in other frameworks? Maybe you would start dynamically showing and hiding and queuing up CSS animations. Well, if this, you just don't supply a URL parameter, and it'll just load up the components and handle it without affecting the URL. Something I think is pretty nice. So, tooling. Who's kind of dealt with some of the JavaScript tooling that we have out nowadays? Who does not like it? It's the same hands. Yeah, it's kind of crazy out there. There's like roll up, Webpack, gulp, grunt, broccoli, and probably so many more that I'm just missing that just haven't made its way out to Hacker News. All because JavaScript has kind of grown up as a language. It's not the little scripting language that we had before. We actually have proper language features like classes. Not only that, we have more we have more static languages like TypeScript, which build on top of it and have their own build processes to compile down to something that runs in the browser. It all kind of promises that you're going to be more efficient, kind of a better developer, and have a much more pleasant experience in making your app, but it actually adds a lot of overhead. ES6 brings so many concepts. I think some of the more important ones are like proper scoping, promises built into the language, classes, all good things. TypeScript takes a step further with its own static typing process, which is all entirely optional, so something I think it's important. And adding that completion inside of your editor. How do you kind of build that all together? I think the React folks kind of had found the same problem where they had all these things, but to get to a point where you could build, you spent maybe a day or two on just configuring your build step, getting your watch ready, getting your server going. Some of it with tools that there's no documentation for, and you kind of just had to read the source and hope it worked. We kind of provide our own build step for you. So we have our build step based on TypeScript because we think it offers the best support for every developer. Again, typing and all the static analysis is entirely optional, so you don't need it if you don't want it. But the important part is the build step is there to just work out of the box. This whole entire time, I have the build step running over here. It's running, taking care of my server, taking care of compiling all the SAS, updating all the actual code. So if I were to, let's see, if I was to console log what I'm passing in here, save. Yeah. You can see it's already detected that something's happened. It should start and update everything. And then we go back. The whole watch is already taken care of for me, and I don't have to worry about the maintenance of that or how to actually do that. Coincidentally enough, we also kind of follow what the Create React App CLI folks did, and we store all of that behind a single app script. So all that's just kind of pulled down whenever you started. And if you want to back out and opt out and get your own build step, super easy to just integrate that. Maybe you have something already kind of set up. Maybe you like Webpack. Maybe you just want gulp. It's all kind of in there. But there's also kind of one more important part of this. This whole thing called progressive web apps. Who's heard of progressive web apps before? Okay, so a few. So the whole concept is that you have this app that can be installed and saved to your home screen, run inside of like a Chromeless browser. So no native UI, no forward and back buttons. It's all just kind of a full screen experience. You get things like offline capabilities, Serviceworker for caching. You get splash screens, and you get also a dedicated icon on the user's home screen. Very, very respectable things that native apps also has. Best part about it is that once they're already on there, they're just kind of ready for it to be used. We don't have to go to an app store. We can just deploy it to the web, and the user gets it all set up. And this is out of the box supported with Ionic. So we provide you with everything that you need. And to create a progressive web app, you really only need two or three things. You need a manifest file, which this is just going to provide that additional metadata. Say, here's my icon, here are my accent colors, here's what I want it to be actually called, how should this run when it gets displayed. And then you need this thing called a service worker. Now, Serviceworker works by caching your data. I'm gonna blank on this. So Serviceworker acts as like an in-between, so that way anytime you load data from a server, you can set it up to automatically cache that into the browser's storage and on the device's storage, so that way it'll automatically load even if there is no connection. If for some reason you want to bypass the cache and go directly to the server, you can do that as well. It does require HTTPS, and I'm through GitHub Pages with this demo app, which does not support HTTPS for custom URLs. So I have it comment out for now, but the Serviceworker for this is pretty bare bones to give you a good example of how to actually use it. We can get responses from the network. We can cache them. We can even incrementally version them. So say we want to make sure that we're only caching stuff if it matches, if its version is greater than this. So once you start integrating it into your build process, you can automate most of this and have it automatically handled for you. So let's open Visor again. So I was showing you this app right here, which is the native app. If I open up this guy right here, this is actually the progressive web app. Still have offline. Figure this out. You can tell I don't use Android too much. Web Unleashed, awesome. So we'll open up the app again. You notice it automatically displays a splash screen based on the information I provided in my manifest. I have this native app-like experience where I'm not seeing any browser Chrome, I'm not seeing, forward, back, pull, refresh buttons. I'd have everything that's kind of provided out of the box. So again, got all of that done. Can't Android well. Okay. We'll go back. We have, same performance. If there's any lag, mostly just because of the actual screencasting. But I have my list of 50 songs. Let's see. I want to look at this one, and I may not get the actual play-pause button through native controls, but the whole point is that if that feature isn't there, the app should still function. So I have that all coded into the demo, and so everything still works. I didn't really change any code. Everything that was already in it just knew, like, if there's no Cordova, if there's no plugin, just handle it another way. And all that logic should just work out of the box. So yeah, it's the same Cordova app that you would be writing normally, but you just deploy it to the web, which has so many benefits that you don't have to go through the Apple app review process. I think the average is now around 10 days for your app to get reviewed by a single person to review your app, and then say, okay, you can push it to the store now. And at any point between there, they can say, okay, and then go back and say, no, it's not okay. You need to fix this stuff. So things just work. So no single authority can say whether or not your app can go out there. I think that's pretty important. So I'm going to wrap up a little bit earlier because I do want to I do want to take some questions. But I really think that with Ionic 2, it's really pushing what the web is capable of doing. And it just happens to coincide with this point where browsers are trying to make a real big push for just putting everything back into web. You can build for the web and have this still great native-like experience without having to write any native code. And more importantly, the users win after that because they don't have to go to an app store and download 150 meg app for Facebook. No big deal. So I will tweet out these links, but this is the link to the actual slide deck. So if you want to take a snapshot of that right now, you can. All those links are live, so there will be the repo to the actual app itself, and my contact information if you have any questions. But if you have any questions right now, I'd love to take them. Yeah, in the front.
Hi, so you got a 404 error. It reminds the user that it's still a browser. Why do you? I don't think it's using a native UI component.
Sorry, what was that?
I don't think it's using native UI components. Why would you use that compared to native script?
You wouldn't use the a native UI component. So why wouldn't you use native UI components when you have other solutions out there, right? So I built that with a single code base. I was able to deploy it to iOS, native Android, and also to the web without having to, figure out how do I do that and how do I, okay, well then do I have the native version, then I have the web version. No, this is all the same code base and just deployed multiple targets. Not saying there's anything wrong with maybe you would want that. If you do, cool. But I'm just saying, out of the box, you get that cross-platform capabilities without having to jump through hoops. Yeah, it does iOS and Android, but it doesn't run on the web. So that's the big point, is that you're not sandboxed to just iOS and Android. You have the full spectrum. Anywhere the web can run, Ionic can run as well. Cool. Any other questions? You in the red shirt or red hoodie?
When you're building your app with Ionic now, are you making like that new web view in iOS? I don't know, is it WK web view?
Yeah, so when you're running inside of iOS, are you using WK WebView?
Is that it?
Yeah, we have support for a plugin version of it. So if you want to opt into it, it's pretty stable nowadays. We've been able to fix a few of the issues that were already out there. I have it on my iOS phone, but I'm from the US, and I don't have service here in Canada. But yeah, if you wanted to use WK WebView, easy one-line install, and you get, I think like the stats are 30% improvement in memory consumption and JavaScript execution. Quite an improvement, though iOS hasn't really had many issues with performance as compared to, like, say, Android. So, you had a question right behind him.
What would be the biggest thing you wanted to be aware of coming from Ionic 1 and then transitioning to Ionic?
So what would be the big things to be aware of coming from Ionic 1 to Ionic 2? So the big things to be aware of is that there are some fundamental differences between Angular 1 and Angular 2. Code's not just going to automatically work. You have to do some rewrite capability. You have to do some rewrites and restructure the code. Another thing to kind of keep in mind is that your states and your kind of directives from V1 might not be needed anymore in V2. So really rethink everything that you have in there and figure out, do I need this in V2? I think I've upgraded now several apps where I was able to just look at code from V1 and just delete it because I didn't need it anymore. Anything Angular specific, I was able to just work with what the browser offered. So, any other questions? Yes, I'll go with you.
How would you upgrade your app after you already have the app? Like, can you upgrade your app just inside of the app itself without going through the stores?
So how would you upgrade your app? Would that be in relation to the progressive web portion or still the native portion?
The native portion.
So for the native portion, we actually have a nice little secret, is that because it's all web code, we're not bound by the same review process that Apple has. They actually have a specifically blocked section saying, if your code is rendered in a web view and is not compiled code and is not something that has to be executed by the device in some kind of compiled sense, you can just push and do your own kind of upgrade process. So if you think about it, Facebook's articles, all that's pulled from the web, and it wouldn't make sense to update every single time a new article got posted. So anything that you want to load, we have a plugin that supports this. So if you update and push it to the Ionic cloud services, it'll automatically pull that down and prompt the user saying, hey, there's an update, please update. And bypass that whole store process, so as soon as you deploy, it's live. Make sense? I'm going to come back to you right there.
So Ionic 2 is still in beta. Do you have any idea as to when you feel it's going to move into like a release candidate?
It's in RC0 now.
Oh.
We did it last week. Blog posts on it, blog at Ionic, blog.ionic.io that I wrote going over the whole update process for RC0. So we are out of beta, hopefully to get into RC final and 2.0 final. You had a question.
I've done Cordova apps built in Angular, but how do plugins work with Ionic versus Cordova?
They work the same way because Ionic itself is just the UI layer. All we're really focused on is giving you a decent user experience with pre-built UI components. We're not going to say affect how you would work with the plugin. That being said, we do offer some wrapper functions around most of the common plugins, especially the core ones from Cordova, to make the experience a little bit better. So things like the camera, we have a nice promise-based API to make sure that all works. And it's all provided for you out of the box. Same deal. You would install the push notification plugin, and we have a utility class to make sure that all that just works seamlessly without having to jump through anything. Cool. Were there any other questions? Yeah.
So that one screen that you went to, and it showed, I've always had to go where it served to my browser, and then I resized my window on the developer. How did you do the where it showed you the iOS and then the Android and the Windows phone? That would save a lot of time.
So if we go to here, I'll clear this so we get to the top. Ionic serve --lab. And it'll go through, build everything, and prompt with a 3-device preview, Windows. So yeah, if you want to be able to preview iOS, Android, and Windows Phone all at the same time, Ionic serve --lab, you're golden. Cool. If there are any other questions? Awesome. You guys have been amazing, so thank you.